The Karate Kid Street Rumble has arrived, marking 2 years since the last game of the franchise was released. With the current beat-em-up revival we're experiencing, there's even a G.I. Joe game that's joining in on the fun. How does the game hold up? Is the Karate Kid Street Rumble worth playing? Before we get started, I want to include a brief disclaimer. By no means am I compensated for this review or influenced in any way. These are my own thoughts on the game as I experienced it for the first time on my live stream and as I played some offline as well. First, let's get into the graphics. This is what drew my attention to the game's original trailer, along with the gameplay itself. For the most part, the sprite work is done pretty well. There are some liberties taken with how some of the characters look, which I assume was done to avoid paying fees for using the original actor's likeness. This is something that does happen in a licensed game, such as Rocky and Rocky Legends for example. I think Buff Sato is probably one of my favorite things in the game, as when he first showed up on screen for me, I could not believe this at all. However, the cutscene art throws me off for two reasons. The lack of likeness of the characters, which admittedly, the first Cobra Kai game suffered from this too, though you could tell who people were supposed to be and it did have voice acting, and the art style itself. It looks like a low-budget 90s G-rated movie or almost a kid's storybook. The style just doesn't mix with the sprite work. Next, let's talk about the game's sound. Some of the OST is fairly decent, but it also feels generic. I imagine that trying to either put Bill Conti's score straight in or covering it in some manner probably cost an insane amount of money, so they had to compose the music themselves. However, some tracks of the OST do feel rather generic at times. I'll say some of my favorites are Path to Victory, Balanced Strike, Nightlife Knockout, and Back to the Mat. I get what they were trying to do with Shadow of the Cobra to reiterate how Terry manipulated Daniel, but I feel like the overuse of the theremin kills the vibe of the stage. Despite how you feel about the Cobra Kai games, Leo Berenberg and Zach Robinson, the composers of the soundtrack for the show, did amazing jobs for the game soundtracks as well. This is not a slight at the team who is behind the music of this game, but it is a tough act to follow. Not to mention, TMNT Shredder's Revenge, which you'll hear me make a lot of comparisons to this game, had a phenomenal soundtrack that really went back to the roots of the previous TMNT games, even using some of the same instrumentation. I think also the lack of voice acting hurts it a little, as there are some stock screams and sound effects used for Kreese. The sound effects could be a little bit more impactful as well, but that's just me. Now let's talk about the main topic of discussion, the gameplay itself. For the most part, despite it being stiff at times, it actually plays pretty well. Some of the stiffness comes with trying to dash in the opposite direction. For example, if I'm already facing right, I just hit right twice to start running or dashing. But if I want to suddenly dash the other way, I have to hit left 3 times, once to face the other way and twice to start running. This gets frustrating sometimes because when I want to do a dash attack on an enemy in the opposite direction, I sometimes don't execute a dash attack and just execute a standing attack instead. Now, I don't know if a patch was applied, as I was playing the PC Steam version after my initial playthrough, or I just developed muscle memory and started getting used to it when playing through the game again with friends, but this was one of the things that stuck out to me. The movement is smoother in a game like Shredder's Revenge, where you can dash in either direction and even roll vertically in either direction. I will say that combo canceling into signature moves is pretty nice, and the fact that you can use stored up focus meter to substitute damage is actually a nice touch. Another nice feature in multiplayer is the way you can revive teammates, which improves upon what is seen in Shredder's Revenge. For example, in that game, you would have a timer to try to beat to revive an ally. If you let go for any reason or if an enemy knocks you away, the timer will resume. However, in Karate Kid Street Rumble, you don't lose the timer right away. What I mean by this is, say you got someone's revive meter up to 75%, but then you have to bat back a quick enemy. The meter slowly goes down, and if you can catch it in time, you just resume reviving from where the meter is. And if for some reason the revive meter goes to 0, you still have a little bit of grace period to try to revive someone. This is actually a really great implementation by the team and deserves to be praised. Like Shredder's Revenge, you can level up your character and unlock new features for that character, such as extra lives and more signature moves to use, which in my opinion seem to increase with power but only still use 1 focus meter, which is awesome, duration of perfect dodge, etc. Speaking of perfect dodge, I misunderstood this feature in my first playthrough. I assumed that even dodging an attack at the right time, there was no benefit because you didn't even gain focus meter. As I learned later on, the more you level up, the more window you get not only with your perfect dodge, but also the more damage you deal after a perfect dodge, making boss fights that much easier. The boss fights are a good training ground to learn this, as the bosses do not have knockback like the enemies do, but if you deal enough damage, they are temporarily stunned so you can unleash your signature moves to take down the boss quickly. Before I wrap up the section on gameplay, there are two things I need to talk about that are related: multiplayer and difficulty. This game is not meant to be played by one person unless your character is already decently leveled. Let me explain. Some of the later levels, notably the final Karate Kid Part 2 level Fight and Dance, gave me a really hard time with some of the enemies and getting comboed over and over. The problem is, when you're knocked down, you have a slow recovery. So if an enemy has an attack where they can attack you while you're down, you could easily lose a life very quickly. And then trying to take on Chosen was a challenge in itself, given his homing attack that was hard to avoid. Now, I'd also like to point out that I'm no stranger to either beat 'em ups or fighting games. I've never played in the grand finals of EVO, but this isn't my first rodeo. I spent nearly 2 hours on this level, and that was on the average difficulty of medium. After just wanting to be done with the level entirely, I set it down to easy, and it went from one extreme to another. Now the level was way too easy. And get this, because I beat Fight and Dance on easy, I can't play the other levels on medium. I get what they were doing with this. It's like GoldenEye, where you can only unlock the higher difficulties once you beat the previous one, but it's a little annoying. Now admittedly, having played the game since then, getting used to the mechanics and leveling up Mr. Miyagi, I could probably solo the game. And I'm not even saying that the game needs to be super easy, because I believe a lot of games nowadays lack challenge. It just needs to be adjusted properly and not go from one extreme to another, from easy to medium. So this is where multiplayer comes in. Multiplayer makes the game way easier. Now you might say, well Stryfe, yeah, if you have friends you can jump someone with, of course you're winning the fight. But again, let me explain. This game has no scaling outside of mini-boss or boss fights that spawn enemies. Shredder's Revenge will increase the amount of enemies you face and adjust the boss's health the more players you have. However, remember how I said I was having trouble with Fight and Dance and spent nearly 2 hours on the level? I was able to beat it with a friend on medium first try. So imagine how even more easy it was when I was able to beat the level with a full team. So to run through the game quickly, you need to play multiplayer. But there's one problem. Karate Kid Street Rumble does not support online play in-game. It's local only. The only way I was able to achieve this on the PC was through Steam Remote Play, but depending on your friend's connection, sometimes there might be some lag, even if I'm hosting with a fiber connection. Now thankfully, there weren't many issues and we were able to get this done, but this is the same problem the first Cobra Kai game had. No online play, much less releasing the game with no online play in the middle of the pandemic. So then the question we should be asking is, why release a game that is meant to be played with others without the option to play online? To me, it just makes very little sense and is one of the issues that is hard to justify the $40 price point. Gameplay aside, how faithful is it to the movies and source material? It's actually pretty accurate. Of course, some liberties have to be taken because, well, Daniel wasn't jumping people with Mr. Miyagi, Ali, and Kumiko. But it works and it highlights important scenes in the movies. The beach fight, the first day at school, the Halloween dance, the All Valley, the Obon Festival, Mr. Miyagi's fight with Kreese and Silver, you get the idea. It even uses some of the training from the movies as minigames, which I thought was a smart idea and something I mentioned in one of my earlier videos, which ironically, one of the ideas I mentioned was playing through the Karate Kid trilogy scenes. However, one notable omission is the ice-breaking minigame. I'm also surprised they didn't incorporate some of the muscle memory training such as painting the fence and wax on wax off as minigames. Maybe it was due to time constraints or whatnot, but I feel like these were missed opportunities. One of the bosses I'd critique is Terry Silver. Silver is mostly known for his kicks, as we see in his fight with Mr. Miyagi, and that's due to Thomas Ian Griffith's Taekwondo background. Now, some of his attack patterns do reflect what he did in the movie, but he should have had way more kicks in his repertoire than just one which is part of the combo. I can only assume that the boss fights were supposed to be simple patterns, but some of the other patterns made sense. Chosen has this rush flying kick, which reminds me of how he kicked the statue in his fight with Daniel. Another small gripe is how Bobby Brown reappears as a sub-boss before facing Mike Barnes, which makes no sense as all the students left the Cobra Kai dojo at that point. There's also no mention of Jessica Andrews whatsoever, who was present during some of the key levels of the Karate Kid Part 3 section, notably the fight with Mike Barnes at the bonsai shop and during the nightclub. Overall though, it is very faithful to the movies and does a pretty good job with recreating the memorable scenes. So here's my final verdict of the game. Is a Karate Kid Street Rumble worth playing? Even with my criticisms aside, I think the game is a 7 out of 10. This is miles ahead of Cobra Kai 2 Dojo's Rising and returns to the beat 'em up roots of the first game. I will say though that the lack of online play hurts it, and one of the strong arguments I've seen made against the game that's hard to disagree with is that Shredder's Revenge is not only cheaper, but also a more polished game. And I'd have to agree. Granted, I'm still grabbing a Switch version of Karate Kid Street Rumble in case friends come over or if I bring my Switch somewhere for others to play with me, so I'll still support the game. But I think the price point should be reconsidered given some of the adjustments that need to be made, along with online play to be added. If you're a die-hard Karate Kid or Cobra Kai fan, then pick it up. I will say if they can patch some of these things while adding online play and lowering the price point at least by $10 to $15, I think the sales would increase and we could also see an opportunity for a Cobra Kai game in this style. I want to once again thank my friend Tyler for providing me with a review code for the game. This is a good step in the right direction for games of the Cobra Kai and Karate Kid franchise, it just needs to tweak some fundamentals. Speaking of the franchise, I had some ideas for future Cobra Kai and Karate Kid games, with some of these features I talked about seem to have been implemented in Cobra Kai 2 Dojo's Rising and Karate Kid Street Rumble.